All right, good morning, good afternoon. How's everyone doing and what's new in adaptive physical education? So this is going to be our second podcast episode on behavior management in adaptive physical education, but really it applies, I think, to all aspects of education for behavior management. So this is a really nice broad one, and there's a lot of tangible strategies for this one. So I wanted to kind of give an update on some things that were going on. I just got back from Shape America's National Conference in Minneapolis, in the great city of Minneapolis. My first time there was a lot of fun. I got to see a lot of people and talk to a lot of people. And I just maybe a few updates on Shape and some cool things that I got to see. So one thing is I ran into Hester Henderson, Dr. Hester Henderson from Utah State University, and I needed to definitely make a apology on the podcast to her, because last episode we talked about the book Positive Behavior Management in Physical Activity Settings with Dr. LeVay, and I mentioned Dr. Ron French because I work with him as well at Texas Women's University, but I forgot to mention Dr. Hester Henderson. So Dr. Henderson, I apologize, and thanks for the reminder. So here's her shout out right now on the podcast. So as well, I got to be in a SIG meeting for special interest group at Shape America, and we're definitely getting our voices heard for adaptive physical education, and a lot of positive movements going on for APE at Shape. And our website page is going to be available under the membership tab. So if you want to go in there, I think they're going to have some different Dear Colleague letters. They're going to have position statements and some other additional resources on Shape America, or on Shape America's website under adaptive physical education. So that's really positive to hear what's going on with APE under Shape. So there's a lot of presentations I get to go to, a lot of people I got to meet and see. And I also presented one with Leah Gowdy and Dr. Davis and Dr. Dillon. We presented on teaching disability sport as its own genre in general ed PE, or could be an AP as well, but that was kind of our. And I also got to make a guest appearance very quickly on Shape America podcast with Colin Brooks and Matt Pomeroy. It was really nice as well. Got to give a good shout out, so that was awesome. And got to meet a whole bunch of people, and have really interesting conversations. And before I get going with this episode of what's new in adaptive physical education with behavior management, I wanted to quickly say that I also run a blog called All Good Education is Special Education, and I had an interesting conversation with somebody in Washington State about the title of that and what that may mean to some people, and I need to think about it a little bit more, but I think that I'm going to write a blog entry on that, but I don't want that title to give the wrong impression, because we do need people that are specialized in working with special needs populations. So I think that maybe I need to look at that title and think about something along the lines of all good education is differentiated instruction, because I think that's true, but I don't want to give the impression whatsoever that what we do does not take people that are highly specialized with working with different populations of students. And I think it takes a lot of training and in college training and certificates to prove that someone is competent to work with special needs populations. So I'm going to write a blog in the near future to try to clarify that, but I just wanted to mention that's coming up. And, if there's ever any time, I get to meet a lot of people at Shape, and they give me their opinions on, what's going on the podcast and what's going on the blog, and I really appreciated it. So, I want to make this a two-way conversation as much as possible. And this is meant to be, an awareness and some professional development podcast, but it's not, this, if you need something that needs to go to an administrator, if this needs, we need to make sure that we're getting the right resources. So you want to go to, NCPEID's website, the consortium website, and get some position papers. My podcast and my blog, yes, we do have experts on here, but this is not a peer-reviewed blog, and this is not a peer-reviewed podcast. So just know that. But I do hope that the podcast has a lot of valuable resources, information for practitioners, and helps start some conversations as well. So with that, we're going to get back to the podcast on behavior management with Dr. LeVay and National Teacher of the Year, Brad Weiner, and Celine, who is works as an ASD consultant. So I hope you enjoy it. So let's talk a little bit about, there are proactive strategies for behavior management, and there's reactive strategies for behavior management as well. But let's talk a little bit about what are the benefits of doing proactive strategies. What are some proactive strategies? Sometimes, I worked in a behavioral setting where we had a lot of behavior issues, and we talked a lot about proactive strategies, and I know that they're important. But when is it necessary? When is it necessary to have those reactive strategies, and how do we best implement them still, if that makes sense?
What you're referring to when you say reactive, I'd like to change it to a consequence-based strategies.
Right, yeah.
Right? It's because when you say consequence, we have the proactive or the antecedent strategies where, one, we set up the environment, we make sure that the environment is structured. We look at the noise level or in the environmental settings, and teaching the skill deficits, and, teaching the expectations of our students, and establishing reinforcement systems. When you say consequence-based strategies, or what you call it, reactive strategies, how do we respond? Let's say, for example, if the child is seeking for attention and he engages in physical aggression, how does the adult respond to that? Is that what you're referring to, a reactive strategy? So if it's an attention-seeking behavior, child engages in physical aggression, do we provide verbal reprimand? Do we look at the student? Versus to make sure not providing any eye contact at all, or use visual supports instead of verbal prompts when you are redirecting the student. So those are the examples of consequence-based strategies. And I think consequence-based strategies are important so that, especially if we put it on the plan, so that everyone's going to be on the same page in terms of reacting or providing these consequence-based strategies whenever a student engages in the problem behavior.
One of the things I would share, I share with my students, like a lot of times, act, don't react with my university students, is that think through for briefly, what is your plan? You've gone in there with a proactive plan. Another thing I've seen in the literature by Don Hellison, having a solution bank, is that you sit there and you reflect on, if this happens, then I'm going to do this. So, for example, Brad was talking earlier, if his students are not listening to him, he's going to stop class. He's not going to talk over them. He's going to give a signal, and he's going to redirect them, and he's going to have them listen. He's thought that through, and he's acted on that, and that's being proactive and having those strategies ready before you even enter the gym. But the reality is that the point you're making is sometimes you have children that come up with behaviors that you haven't really planned for, and you have to be ready, but you have to work together as a team. Here are some of the things we're going to do if we're seeing these real challenging behaviors. We're going to try to consistently apply these behaviors. That's the other piece that I think is important, is that you can't just think that trying something once is going to work. You have to be consistent. You have to come up with a plan. Everybody's got to be on the same page, and that can take time, and finding out what works for that child. It's challenging.
If I'm applying these strategies and they're working for some time which, it could be a novelty thing that it's working, you don't know at first, but then they stop working after, whatever, a week or two of doing it. Do I completely throw away the strategies I was already using, or what do I do then?
My initial response would be, without looking at the child or whatever, is that maybe you need something more powerful. Maybe you need to combine the strategy you're using with another technique and combine a couple of things. If you're, when you look at reinforcers, you're going from like almost least amount of intervention. And so if you're using a prompt or a smile and that worked for a few weeks, now all of a sudden that doesn't. Maybe you need to add something a little more powerful. Maybe you need to add a reinforcer that they're working on. Maybe you need to use the Premack principle, or if you do this, then will get that. And so you have to have a big toolbox, and you have to have lots of strategies, and you can't think, okay, I use this strategy, I have one strategy and it's going to work for everybody. One size doesn't fit all. And also, just because I use this strategy and it worked for 3 weeks and the child was into Star Wars, for the last 3 weeks, and maybe that's not reinforcing to him anymore after a month. So that's what you need to do. And that's what's so fascinating about behavior management. There's no cookie cutter approach. It's a science and it's an art.
And you constantly have to review and revise your plans.
Yeah, and then also one thing's really important is that when addressing behaviors of concern, you also have to look at the function of the behavior. Maybe you're addressing the behavior wrong. If the child is engaging this behavior because he is escaping a demand, then the consequence that you're providing him is to give him a break every time he engages in behavior, then you're just reinforcing the behavior of concern. So I think that's an important point, identifying the function of the behavior, then addressing it.
I would think that's an area a lot of my university students really struggle with, and a lot of teachers, is this whole piece of looking at the function of the behavior and looking at the antecedents, sort of the things that you're doing. And if the child, like Selena is saying, is attention seeking, and you're telling him to be quiet all the time and you're just giving him more attention, all you're doing is reinforcing that behavior.
So, let's talk about, some of that proactive strategies again, and let's talk specifically about where motivation comes into play trying with behavior management strategies.
Okay, well, that's a couple of things. Like with proactive, I mean, you need to examine your program and say, what's important to me? Is it entering and exiting the gym? Is it, for example, do I have signals and transitions? How am I going to work on that? Those are all things. How am I going to organize groups? How am I going to distribute and collect equipment? I mean, these are all proactive things that you can be setting up beforehand. These are the typical routines. Anything that's a routine that you're going to be doing over and over again in your gym, then you need to set that up and have established some type of routine for that. And that would be proactive. It could be attendance taking. It could be a number of things.
The place where people may struggle the most is with that downtime, the transition time, moving from one lesson segment to another lesson segment. And I'm not sure that physical educators may always consider how specifically they're going to transition from one area to another or keep the students engaged. A student may need some sort of engagement to get from one area of the room to the other, or from one lesson segment to the other, or they may struggle with one lesson segment ending, and then how am I going to start something new? So those are some specific things that I could be proactive about in thinking of how I'm going to move through that transition time period.
We could spend all kinds of time just talking about transitions, because that's something my university students really struggle with when they're at the preliminary stages of learning how to teach. And looking at, just as simple as saying, you have 15 seconds when the music starts, you need to be over here in 15 seconds at the next station. And then reinforcing, Scott, I like the way you're over there. You're the first student over there. And so catch students being good rather than, saying, Brad, come on, let's get going here. You need to be going here, ignoring Brad's inappropriate behavior and reinforcing your appropriate behavior for being the first student over there. And you have 15 seconds to get over there. So catch students being good. positive pinpointing is important. And university students and teachers struggle with transitions and downtime.
And then what does 15 seconds mean to Brad? Maybe Brad may need a visual timer to move with the 15 seconds to get over there. But yeah, catching students being good, maintaining that positive environment is real important.
That's why having music with your lesson, and they know that when the music stops, they stop, and then when the music, they have to transition, and then when the music starts, they have to. That's another way, a tangible way for them to understand this abstract concept of time.
So if I'm in a school and if I'm teaching inclusively or I just see these things, but what about bullying in schools, and specifically when that happens with our students with disabilities? What do we do to avoid those problems? Rather, if it's in our PE class, if I'm doing an inclusive one and Billy, he has a CP and he's not able to do the same things that everyone else is doing, and he's starting to get picked on. What do I do?
Well, for my environment, there are a couple strategies that go into place. One, that positive behavior intervention system. If a school has a positive behavior intervention system, I constantly reinforce that behavior system. And then from the very first day, I am role modeling positive behavior and talking about positive behavior, integrating positive ways to interact with each other and help each other. And going back to what was stated before is if a student is demonstrating positive behavior, I am providing that reinforcement, so that feedback. So from the very first day, I am trying to create a positive environment. Is that going to eliminate all the negative behaviors possible? No. Are there students that may come in and start bullying aspects? It's possible, but how I react to that should be in a positive manner. And if a student does something that is misbehaving, what strategies can I implement? And one strategy that I've implemented is from a book, Filling the Bucket, and it talks about if you are positive to somebody else, it puts water in their bucket, and if you're negative to somebody else, are you tipping their bucket? And so I read the book to them, and then we have these slips of paper where they can fill people's buckets. I saw Johnny doing really well, or Tim helped me out today. And then they put that in and we go over that at the end of the class. So again, having those strategies and keeping it real positive.
Yeah, I would say, just to reinforce a couple of things that Brad said, the first thing is what's going on in your school. Is there a school-wide bullying prevention program? Are they following some type of program? But also, it's, your gym, that's your environment, and your attitude and how you act towards all the students in your class is crucial. And one of the really big things is one of my expectations would be no put-downs. Is that we work together, we do cooperative games. Your first unit might be on cooperative games and working together and sharing and trust and all of those types of things that can help with bullying. It might be difficult throughout the entire school, but that's your environment, that's your gym, and you can set up it in a way where that's not acceptable.
And I think one of the biggest things that people need to remember is not to take it personally. It's not a personal attack on me if we're having if there is bullying, and to be able to keep my emotional composure, because sometimes if something happens, we may lose our emotional composure, and that can set off that negative vibe. So want to keep it positive and keep that emotional composure.
Act, don't react.
That's probably the only time that I've ever lost my cool, like legit, is seeing those, bullying types things from some gen ed peers about, and I have lost my cool on that stuff, which is not okay. What about technology? How can we use technology with behavior management strategies?
That one of the things that's been really fun to watch is how a lot of teachers are starting to use tablets, and you can have these apps on your tablets, and you can set up your rules and your expectations, because if you have visual learners, then you can actually do some of these things, like you can be real flexible and do them right on the fly, and there's some great apps out there that are available, and like iRewards, where they could be working on, for example, so many stars, is a good one. Choice Maker is another one that you can basically, with Choice Maker, in a minute you could do a Premack principle where you take one picture with the child having their hands by their ears, says I'm listening, and if I listen, then I can, and you have a picture of someone shooting baskets, and you can just download those and you can have that in a minute. So technology is great, and it can help you get organized as well. Like you got Class Dojo, you got Teacher Assistant Pro, and for a lot of teachers, especially physical educators, they can have their whole class on the roster on their Class Dojo or their Teacher Assistant Pro. They can track behaviors with things like Tracker Pro, or just on their smartphone, just looking at the function of a behavior. I think the most important thing is, if you're going to use those things, you need to find out, is it acceptable in your school district, and what are the criteria for doing those things? Like for example, Class Dojo, is that what's the policy in your school district if you're doing things like that and using technology? And you can send that very quickly an email with the profile to the parents on the kids' behavior. So it's been fun to watch a lot of my university students really embrace technology.
Music helps decrease inappropriate behaviors. Technology does the exact same thing. It is very motivating, and instead of demonstrating inappropriate behavior, they are engaged. If they get to touch and manipulate the technology, they are motivated to engage in whatever you're asking for, and oftentimes inappropriate behaviors are decreased.
Yeah, because it can be used as a motivator. Like they're working for tablet time. They're also, they get at the end of class to you videotape them of them like performing certain skills, and they get to watch that. And some kids find that extremely motivating to see themselves on video.
So I think for teachers, one thing that they need to consider when using technology, either from low or high tech, is to consider the purpose of the technology. May it be instructional or as a reinforcement tool. A lot of times I see in classrooms, teachers use it only as a reinforcement tool. And to the point that iPads, for example, you have to consider if iPads can be something that disrupts the lesson or the learning of the student. So as teachers, you have to consider the primary purpose of using technology in your lessons.
Definitely. That's something I haven't really thought about. And what would be like an appropriate purpose, and what would be an inappropriate purpose?
Using the iPad as a break. Because the student is disrupting the lesson, so I'll give him the iPad break. I'll take him out of the classroom and have him use the iPad. That's okay. If the iPad has an educational app, the tumbling blocks, he could use that, or the Edmark app that he can use on the iPad for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. That's okay. But a lot of times teachers abuse the purpose of the iPad.
So using the iPad as a means to, if I give them the iPad, the student will be quiet.
Yes.
And kind of pushing them off to the side so that I can instruct these other students.
Yes. So let's, we're going to wrap up now, and I want to talk about we gave out this podcast. We stated that there's a need, especially, you just did one in Maryland. Dr. LeVay's done one. Is it nationwide you did yours?
With about 80 adaptive physical education, 90 APE teachers from around the country. It was in Palestra.
We have this need, and we're, when I'm giving out a podcast to hopefully help some people out as well, but where do people go, when there are more needs, or, that they still haven't had, it's not satisfied yet, they still have more behavior management questions? Where do they go?
Well, personally, I think that one of the things that teachers should do is be more proactive, in the sense that they should go to their administration and seek out in-services and say, we'd like the following in-services, rather than the administration telling them what kind of in-services they should have. Because a lot of times physical educators, adaptive physical educators, go to in-services that don't really pertain to them, and so they should request in services. They should attend professional conferences. But there's a lot of great websites, that they can go to. And, one of the things that, if you look at positive behavior intervention support, that is the only website that is supported by IDEA and by the educational government for behavior management. So that's a great site. But then more specifically to physical education, most people know about PE Central, but they don't know there's a whole section on behavior management. Supportrealteachers.com. This is a PE site out of CSU Chico. They have a whole section on behavior management that's just great. And then we talked earlier about using some of those apps and to help you with it. And then there's a lot of good textbooks out there, that they could go to. Sure. And we've tried to make it applied. Like our textbook, we tried to, not have it just be theory driven, or, and be accused of being in our ivory tower. We wanted to, there's a lot of application to it. So that's what I would share. I don't know, what do you feel like, Brad, that those teachers, what did they say to you that they need? Or
in the survey they indicated that there was a need, and so they didn't really state how they were going out and trying to get professional development themselves. They just said that there was a need. So this is one way, by answering surveys, they are then helping themselves, because here we are discussing behavior management, and this will go back to them. So if there's a survey that comes through to them, filling it out and recognizing that there's importance and that they'll get support from it. But it goes back to that collaboration and understanding that there's a lot of knowledge throughout your building. So going to administrators, like you said, or going to the educational team, the special education team, telling people that you're having some difficulty, and then most likely somebody's going to be able to provide you with support, whether it's within your county or a training that you can go to outside of your county. Are the places that I would start. Those resources, the internet resources you gave, are excellent resources for anybody that's listening to this, that they can easily go to those and get some support as well.
All right. Well, I think those are great resources, and some of them I just learned, you just taught me about, so I might have to go. So, I'm really happy that everyone was on the show. It was an awesome episode. It's going to be probably a two-parter, because we got a lot of content on this. This is awesome. All right, everyone. So I really hope you enjoyed the episode on behavior management within physical education or physical activity. I think there was a lot of really great resources. So we're going to have a little smaller one come pretty soon on the history of ADA with Jeffrey Lee, who is a prior guest, and we'll also have a few more episodes coming up. We got one on law. We're going to do one hopefully on camp abilities, and we have a bunch of other ones coming up. So stay tuned, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.